My name is Perry Hewitt, and I'm a founding board member here at the Marketing Society in New York. When not with the Marketing Society, I work to bring modern marketing and digital product development practices to mission-led organizations. Thanks to everyone for joining us today on this webinar, Moving at the Speed of Crisis, Lessons on Rapid Change from Startups During COVID-19. I know we're all zoomed out at this point on our calendar, so I really appreciate your being present on the screen with us today. These are challenging times, and we're all finding our own ways to cope with stay-at-home measures. We want to engage with you on this call. I'm going to ask that you use the chat button, which you can find on the bottom left side of your screen, center to the left. And please share just one way, first, where you're tuning in from, and one way right now that you're coping during these stay-at-home times. I know everyone in New York City appears to be baking. You cannot get flour or yeast to save your life. I myself am going for long walks. But please use the chat button and engage in the conversation. First, a quick word about the Marketing Society. We're a 3,000 member organization with 7 hubs around the globe. As a society, everything we do is about empowering brave leaders. This morning is no exception. We're pleased to welcome 2 leaders at startups who are de facto experts on rapid change from very different approaches and industries. Each has made some quick and impactful decisions in recent months about their businesses during COVID-19. And for us, as marketers, it's important to learn how they've shifted quickly around these decisions and be able to shift their marketing and communications to deliver these messages in these challenging times. First, we have Julie Johnson Roberts, who's the co-founder and CEO of Armored Things. Julie founded Armored Things after working at Qualcomm, where she was focused on cybersecurity for the Internet of Things. She's a Boston resident and a Harvard Business School alumna, just like our New York Marketing Society board chair, Margaret Malloy. Julie, would you please introduce yourself and your company and share your coping tip during these times? Thank you.
Thanks, Perry. Hi all, my name is Julie Johnson Roberts. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Armored Things. Armored Things specializes in what we call crowd intelligence. We'll get into why crowd intelligence is changing in the world of COVID, but we like to understand patterns of people and flow for security and operations of large venues. My coping technique is probably a little bit unique. I had the great fortune to get married in December, and so I've been writing thank you notes in my free time and still finding ways to avoid it.
It's like a gratitude journal with a stamp on it.
Yes.
Next, we also have Rob Schutz, who's the Chief Growth Officer and co-founder of Row, where he leads all growth, communications, and marketing efforts. Prior to his role at Row, Rob was VP of Growth at Bark, the makers of BarkBox, and I will say I had a black lab named Coco at the time, was a huge fan of your product.
I remember Coco. Okay.
Rob lives in the greater New York City area, and he really has distinguished himself by scoring a coveted 3-letter Twitter handle at ROB, if you want to follow him. Rob, please tell us a little bit about Row and your power coping tip during these times.
Thank you for the Twitter shout out. Appreciate that. And thank you for having me, Perry and team. Excited to chat with you guys today. For those that aren't familiar, Row, we are a patient-driven healthcare company. We power 3 digital clinics through telehealth. Roman, which is our men's health clinic, Rory, which is our women's health clinic, and Zero, which is our vertical that handles addiction, starting with smoking cessation. We've built all the technology that powers end-to-end diagnosis to delivery for each of those clinics. We've also built our own national physician network here in the States that's live across all 50 states and DC. And by the end of next year, we'll have 10 physical pharmacy locations across the country that will actually be doing the fulfillment and operations for Row. My coping mechanism, I guess I'd say I've been starting to do Peloton a little more. We have one in our basement. My wife has been more of a power user in the past. I've tried to go down there for 20 minutes every day and drown out the sound of my children roaring like tigers 1 floor above and get a little peace and quiet and exercise in.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Rob. Thanks for the introductions. A word of housekeeping. I'm going to ask a series of questions of our panelists about how they're executing on change, how they're working with their large enterprise orgs who may not be able to pivot as quickly, how they find a middle ground to keep things moving. As we're having our conversation, I'm going to ask that all of you in the audience ask any questions you have in the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. My colleagues at the Marketing Society and I will go through these questions and get to as many of them as we can and address any remaining and follow-up questions. Okay, let's get started. Julie, put down your thank you note pen. We'll start with you. Your company focused initially on using data and AI for crowd intelligence, understanding the flow of people in large crowds. You know, I was lucky enough to run the marathon in New York City last year. 52,000 people, millions of fans. That's a lot of crowd to think about. But now crowds themselves are kind of a risk, right? It's a huge pivot. Can you talk about how you evolved your existing capabilities and made the shift from sort of crowd intelligence to thinking about threshold reporting and similar?
Sure, absolutely. So I think the first phase of this crisis was quite unnerving as an early stage company co-founder who talks about crowds all day long. You know, we're going out and talking to ballparks and stadiums, convention centers. You know, I just come back from CES as things were breaking. How do we go from talking about 30,000 people, 100,000 people, to talking about no more than 10 people and be a viable company? You know, that is probably the scariest thing you can imagine from an early stage founder's perspective. Fortunately, we did exactly what Perry was mentioning. Instead of talking about bottlenecks at venues, crowd flow, operational security, we quickly said, where can we help with what we already have? And because we understand where people are in these large venues down to very granular zones, we said, let's test a bunch of things. Let's throw things at the wall. Let's see what sticks. Let's do some A/B testing. So we put out a series of teasers and tried them with our customers and prospects and said, these are the things we could do to help. Tell us what resonates. So we started with a couple of ideas. You know, how do we integrate thermal cameras so that we can tell you where you have alerts at your gates? Can we show you density alerts? This area is overcrowded based on, you know, what you're saying your new limit should be. Even restaurants and employers are dealing with this now. It's not just the large venue space. Interestingly, the one that recently has been sticking to the wall the most is audit and compliance, which is not something I've talked about a lot. But if you're a venue and you open your doors and you're saying, hey, I'm not going to have more than 10 people in the same zone, how do you prove it? And if someone gets sick and the city or state comes to check out your practices and they're considering, do I shut you down or do I give you a fine? You want to be able to say, here's all the data I have that shows the practices we were following. And that's something that we can do. And it's been really powerful to explore those different teasers as part of our rapid pivoting. And now we're starting to roll those into the product pretty rapidly.
And if I'm a CMO who oversees events for a large SaaS company who's having an event at that venue, you bet that credential your company provides is important to me, because to get people to attend my user conference or my developer conference, I'm going to need 100%. To see that proof point. So Rob, you were early in the game to distance health. You guys, you know, I don't forget, it was 3-4 years ago I first started to hear about you with Roman subscriptions over the internet. But now it seems like you've fully pivoted to a telehealth company. It's very prominent. Can you talk a little bit about how you've managed that transition and your recent expansion into new markets with Rory? And how do you communicate those two things to your customers?
Yeah. You know, we launched Roman, we launched as Roman at the end of 2017. And even into 2018, we still were treating one condition, diagnosis to delivery for erectile dysfunction. We now treat 17 conditions across the three verticals. And the whole goal has been, how do we put patients back in the driver's seat of their health? Like here in the States, maybe not elsewhere, but here in the States, healthcare is not a fantastic experience. The average is it takes 29.3 days to make and get an appointment with a doctor. And this was in a world where you could physically go and see doctors pre-COVID. It would generally cost about $100, and your time with the doctor would average around 12 total minutes. And if you were getting a prescription, you would go and spend anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes waiting to pick up the script. So our goal has always been, we want to provide unlimited ongoing care for patients, but start with whatever is the most important condition for that person. So we call that meeting patients at eye level. So for us, we started with, you know, one condition through Roman, but really identifying pain points, like what is a condition that someone who's experiencing is probably thinking about every morning when they wake up. If a man's experiencing erectile dysfunction, if someone is trying to quit smoking, if a woman is going through vaginal dryness and needs to get access to treatment, like it's probably one of the first things they think about when they wake up. And so starting with kind of whatever is most important to the patient, and then going deeper to build out a stronger relationship and look at underlying conditions and reasons for some of these symptoms has kind of been our whole philosophy. So we've, because we've invested in technology and working on the back end for the last 2.5 years, both on the physician, the EMR, and the pharmacy operating system, that's what's allowed us to launch new conditions, new brands really quickly, always with that focus of what helps bring somebody in. And then once we have our foot in the door, that's when I like to say we can trick people into being healthy. Like once they have a relationship with a doctor and the doctors help them with sometimes some of the most sensitive conditions that they will experience, we will have gained their trust over the long term, and we can help them with things like weight management, which we're just rolling out, or primary care, which we'll continue to invest in, or other areas of their health that maybe aren't the tip of the spear to get someone in the door. But once they are, there's a much deeper conversation that can be had.
Now, I know you launched, you said, as Roman. Now you're the Rowe company. So Rowe is the umbrella with Roman, Rory, and Rowe. And as the head of marketing, was that brand hierarchy your work?
It's a combination. So I have two co-founders, very smart. We've spent a lot of time thinking about how the architecture comes together, and it's an evolution, right? We're 2.5 years in, so we certainly are not claiming to have our long-term brand architecture in place. But what we have found is for certain conditions, it is just much easier to have a gender-specific brand. It's easier, even if you take the same condition. For example, we just launched allergies. We also have treatment for herpes and cold sores. Like even those conditions, you do want to speak differently to a man who's going through that versus a woman who's going through that. And however someone identifies, making sure that you can contextualize your message. So that has been very helpful. Over the long term, we'll figure out if that evolves and starts to look different. I'm sure all the smart marketing folks on the line would have great input into brand architecture here.
It's all about change. So we anticipate there'll be more in the brand and everywhere space, right?
That's right. But yes, that's how we think about it.
Great. So a question for both of you. Perhaps Julie, if you start, you're each running businesses where your work, you don't work in isolation, right? Julie, you have to work with these large venues and security companies and hardware providers. Rob, you have to work with pharma companies, which are heavily regulated, and as you said, network of physicians, and now you're talking about warehouses or physical spaces, I shouldn't say warehouses. Can you each give an example, maybe starting with Julie, of a time when your speed didn't match up with your enterprise partner and how you made it work? Do you split it in the middle, or are there practices, are there tips and tricks that you brought to bear that could help them move forward a little more quickly?
Yes, partners is quite a lead-in topic, actually, I think. Not all partners are created equal is where I would start. The partners' experiences that we've had actually makes me think a little bit of the old Disney cartoons of the tortoise and the hare, because I'm always wary of the hare. We had one great partner who said, or nominally great partner, who said, hey, we have this urgent account coming your way, and they've never needed anything as much as your software. And by the way, it's going to be the biggest deal you've ever had in the history of your company. Great. What's the catch? Okay, the catch is that urgent and imminent to that partner was 24 months. And for those of you on the line who are familiar with startup cycles, you tend to raise capital in 18 to 24 month cycles. You're really trying to put points on the board every 3 to 6 months, make sure that you're continuously growing, changing, scaling. 24 months doesn't really work for that cycle, but I'm happy to stay in touch. I'm happy to keep, things on the back burner, but they would have taken 60% of our capacity for something 24 months down the road. On the other side of the spectrum, the hare, we had a partner come to us who we know has great industry relationships. And they said, listen, we think that your solution could be helpful for someone. They don't have a budget to pay you for a proof of concept. We have all these other customers. Could you ever consider investing the time? And then maybe we'll have this partnership down the road. And we explored it a little bit more, and we found out that this, free POC actually has some pretty big dollars behind it in the near term. And this partner is now bringing us to more and more of its portfolio, including some pretty brand name world events that are potentially being postponed now. But obviously the power of those brands and the reason to continue working with that partner remain the same. So if you look at those two partners on the surface, you start over-indexing for the fast mover, but you might miss the nuance that the fast mover will take all your time and not bring you the same benefits as the person who's building that relationship over time. And I think, you don't necessarily know until you invest in building out that channel a little more, figuring out what bucket they fall into, but you cannot be afraid to walk away. And that's the big learning, I think, for us on partners, is knowing who's going to be accelerators and who's actually going to potentially take you down to their pace.
Well, for a
That's
startup,
that's a great point, Julie. Partners can be can be amazing and really help lead the business and help with brand building and introduction, all those. And they can also be a massive suck of time because you just don't know. You don't know how they're going to pan out. And depending on where you are as a business and your cash position and fundraising, like, you can invest a lot in partnerships. And then even sometimes once you execute them, you're like, why do we do that again?
Right.
Like, should we have done that? That's fine.
It goes back to the whole sunk cost thing, right? You got to know, you still need to be willing to walk away, right? And I'm sure there's examples in your business as well. You've inked the initial paper, but you're like, wait a second, this has more care than we anticipated.
Absolutely. No. In healthcare and in pharmacy, everything moves super quickly. So we've never had any there. No. To your question, Perry. Yes. So a couple different points on partnerships for Row. So one example, and we found the best way to potentially partner with folks is to make things as easy as possible for bigger companies. Like, make it as turnkey as you can. So we came out over the course of about 96 hours in early March. We put together a COVID risk assessment. We were actually the first US company to put that out there for free. Anyone could come online. They could put in their symptoms, their travel history, the contact they've had with other individuals, et cetera. And then based on the risk profile, we would connect them for free with a provider in their state. And so we put that together over the course of a long weekend, moved super quickly, and then made it really, really easy for businesses to claim their own branded page and use that as a resource for their employees, for their customers, et cetera. So we had some big brand names come on board. We worked with Uber, who released the visit to all of their drivers in the US. Also, Postmates, Fiverr, a bunch of gig economy companies that didn't currently provide healthcare for their workers, but wanted to be helpful in that way. But for us, some of the longer term investments in partnership have been more around the pharmaceutical side. So one partnership is we're now a partner with Pfizer, where we are working with them to provide more transparency into our supply chain. So where does the medication come from? Where is it manufactured? People want to see like the assembly line and where everything is put together. And that really matters to patients. It wasn't a quick process, but it was something that was important and valuable to the business. And so we kind of operated at their pace, and we're really excited to be able to be public and partner with them. And then another quick example of the pharmaceutical partnership, we're really excited to launch one of the first direct consumer launches of a new FDA-approved medication. So they actually launched last week. Worked with a pharmaceutical company called Gelisys for a weight management device called Plenity. It's going extremely well. But another one of those where we're dealing with a pharmaceutical company, getting the T's crossed, if you will, took some time, and lawyers and contract review and all those pieces. But that is kind of the price of business when it comes to working sometimes within the existing healthcare system. And we are a very exciting partner for those bigger, more historical pharmaceutical companies as well, because we're like a fast moving, tech company, and you kind of see their eyes light up when we talk about how quickly we can move on different things. But I think to Julie's point, you have to weigh the pros and the cons, and also be willing to say no, even if you've invested that time, because time is capital in a lot of cases for startups, and so got to be really judicious about it.
Great, thanks so much. So our audience here is executive level marketers from around the world who are wrestling with how to represent their brands in the COVID-19 era. There's a real tension between the need to, we need quarterly revenue performance, right? That's true at almost all the organizations we work with are held to a very high level of accountability. But also there's this need to sort of serve your brand's prospects and customers with content and community at this time. No one wants to be doing the hard sell at this moment. There was part of a Slack community, and we all went to our Gmail or our work email accounts and searched for the phrase "We are here for you," and found 30,412 brand emails, right? So how do you have meaningful content and community efforts, but also serve your revenue needs? And how do you think about balancing those two? So the row, health symptoms calculator sounds like one way to do that. But are there ways that you've sort of managed that trade-off internally or seen partners do that?
Sure. Yeah, I'll take it first, Julie. I think best practice right now is just put together a 30-second spot with light piano music, talking about how much you care and how we're in this together in these unprecedented times. So once you've checked that off, no, I think, look, there's a couple different tracks. One is certainly there's tools like the COVID assessment, but then it's also, we immediately did an audit of like, what is our messaging across all of our different channels? Like, what are we saying on social? What are we saying on TV right now? What are our audio scripts look like? Let's make sure we're being, reflective of the times and what people are worried about right now. Something we did very early on. We also wound up running some PSAs with out-of-home and audio campaigns in early March, just about, we had a Stay Apart Together campaign that was pretty successful. But honestly, for us, we're in a unique position where we also, the success of our business is actually, it has a direct correlation to helping people through this pandemic. So like, people can't go to the doctor. They don't want to spend time in a pharmacy with other people waiting for a script. And so we have the ability to help people stay healthy, even if they're stuck at home. So our value props kind of used to be more around convenience, like convenience of talk to a doctor online, skip the pharmacy, et cetera. Those are kind of now safety value props. Like, you don't have to go to a doctor. You don't have to go to the pharmacy. Like, you can do this from home. So we definitely have made some tweaks in terms of messaging, time spent on tools, et cetera. But for the most part, we've actually largely stuck to our plan for rolling out new conditions and services. And our view has been, if we can be helpful to people with their health during this time, that's a massive unlock during a time where people just can't go as freely as they could to the doctor. Or, we just rolled out a prescription dermatology product. Most dermatologists' offices are closed. So the ability to get access to this is really, really restricted. And so we do find ourselves in this unique position of, by doing well, we're actually doing good.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you say that, because I think in a crisis, that tension kind of goes away. At least from our perspective, it feels like everyone is rowing the boat in the same direction, potentially more than they would in a non-crisis environment, right? So, if I think about where do we focus on revenue and product versus community, for us, they're kind of one and the same. And maybe this is a little bit of a nuance of our business, but this is an existential threat to our venues, to convention centers, even to university campuses, right? If they can't figure out a way to reopen safely in a way that people are confident about, that potentially leads to, a very long-term impact on their businesses or their industries that to them is pretty much unacceptable. So we're out there talking to them and talking to them about solutions. Maybe that leads to revenue for us. We're actually being pretty flexible about trying to actually get revenue in the early stages of deploying. We're talking to them about how we help them, where revenue is kind of the secondary talk track, right? If they're able to deploy something, let's solve that piece second. First, let's work on helping you, right? So I do think that, given where people are emotionally right now in these industries, the more we can be there as their partners first and their vendors second, the better.
And I think they're at a moment now where they're just figuring it out, right?
Yeah,
when
exactly.
people coming back. But I do agree, and something I've seen in large organizations is that, the silos breaking down a bit, as organizations say, gosh, we all have this one shared goal. Before, it was really important that marketing owned this and sales owned that and operations owned this. But now we realize all together, we need to figure out a way to host Dreamforce in 2021 or whatever the priority is.
We actually had a Major League Ballpark ask us, what questions should we be asking ourselves? And so I took a step back. I said, there's a lot of questions I could ask them to ask themselves that directly lead to Armored Things, right? But that's not really the best way to help them as their partner. So, here are the 20 factors. We can probably help you with 12 of them, in some direct or indirect way. But you really should be thinking about all 20, because this is a new and changing environment where there's no silver bullet. I want to be part of the solution, but that's not the whole conversation. And I think that went a long way. And they said, hey, can I share this? Yes, please. Let me throw my logo on it just in case, see what happens.
Yeah, if they're not around, right? If these guys don't make it or they aren't financially stable, that's not going to be good business for you long term anyway. So I think you're right. Like, it does feel like a unique moment in time where people are rallying together to help in a way that you haven't really seen, even competitors, because like just from an economic standpoint, long term, we need a lot of people to come out of this stronger. Great.
Thank you. And that's a great segue to Julie. I know you're doing a lot of writing these days, in addition to CEO, co-founder, and thank you notes. You read a lot about the importance recently about two-way trust before large gatherings. Whether we're talking about a sporting event or a marketing industry conference, organizers need to trust individuals that they're minimizing their own personal risk behaviors. And individuals will have to trust organizers are doing everything possible to ensure the safety of the venue. Obviously, Armored Things provides tools that help organizers and venues, but can you share any thinking about how organizers will communicate safety to individuals? Like if you own Dreamforce or a giant, F8, how would you think about communicating that safety? I think every CMO in this audience has some physical events in their portfolio, which we hope will resume maybe fall or spring, and we'll eager to hear the answer to this.
Right, and I think for many, there has been such a focus on conferences as a source of lead gen and networking. I think a lot of folks want to see that come back, and there are a lot of conference organizers who are pretty determined to move forward. We were talking before this call started about ones in July and August, and you say to yourself, would I be comfortable going? What would be the decision point for me personally? What's my family situation? What's my risk level? And then is the conference actually going to happen, or are we going to get close to the starting line and then they'll say, hey, never mind. The way that we're talking to some of these large venues is a lot about how they outwardly communicate. I think for a large sporting venue, you can think about their fans, right? For a university, they need to be talking to the students and their parents. For a corporate campus, it's your employees. For a convention center, you're kind of a facilitator of someone else's event, right? It's a bit of a unique one. So you need to be talking to the folks who are holding conferences in your environment, but then you also need to be equipping them to have the conversation with their attendees. So there's several layers of, call it PR type bullets that you need to have at your disposal to say, here's what we're doing to help. And we're starting a process right now, and we're tiering it into 3 stakeholder buckets of arming our stakeholders with talking points about what they're doing in relation to Armored Things. And I think they can kind of layer on top of that other practices. And we're encouraging them to get out there 6 to 9 months ahead of an event. What that means is, I'm talking about fall and early next year events in some cases. I think for summer events, you're going to be dancing on the line of who's personally comfortable. And it's really hard to get in front of that beyond kind of the messaging that's out there from federal, state officials. So the 3 buckets that we're arming them with, if I go talk to the head of the crisis management team for a ballpark or a convention center or a university, is first your external stakeholder. So if I'm, Yankee Stadium, right? How do I say to my fans, here are all the practices we're putting into place. These ones are preventative. These ones are, mitigants, and these ones are after the fact, things like contact tracing. And here's how you can feel confident in our response. The next group of stakeholders is actually internal, right? Just because you have a COVID crisis team doesn't mean that they have the budget they need to deploy solutions, the full autonomy to deploy anything they want. So there is an internal selling process that goes on, because I think the first chain of the response today is, let's put up plastic partitions everywhere and have people sit in tiny boxes, but come back to our big space. And that kind of breaks down over time, right? There's a tech solution, there's other things you can do, but it requires the internal stakeholders and internal leaders really understanding why the crisis team is getting to that decision. The final one, and then I'll stop, is political leaders, right? If you look at the pro sports and entertainment market, I think it was ESPN who put out a survey a week ago that said they're estimating a $12 billion hit on the pro sports and entertainment market out of a $100 billion industry. I think that's actually way too low because it's not just about that industry, it's about the economic hit to a city, particularly because we've seen these entertainment districts drive the revitalization of a lot of cities, top tier cities, but also emerging cities, right? Places that are building these entertainment districts and then building high-rise apartments, restaurants, shopping centers. If you look at the downstream impact of a pro sporting venue, convention center not coming back, you're talking about thousands upon thousands of jobs from hotels, restaurants, parking lots, people working at that center. And I think working with your political leaders, particularly around things like liability, is something that the venues are just starting to talk about, right? A lot of the well-known folks are getting pulled into the conversation, but everyone should be talking to their leaders, right? How do we sit at the table with you and talk about the economic impact? Because we also need to be doing liability calculations and know whether our local ecosystem is going to be there to support us if a bad thing happens, but we've taken all the best steps we can to prevent it.
Right, and a lot of that's going to land with marketing and communications at the end of the day of, this event occurred, this bad thing happened or didn't happen, or we've taken all these precautionary events, or we're working with the city. These are all new streams of communication and outreach that I feel like are maybe 5% of the enterprise marketer's job before, in combination with government relations, and now is becoming a bigger part of the portfolio.
Totally.
Rob, any thoughts on your end?
What I was just thinking, listening to that, is we're dealing with kind of some of the other end of that, where we're a big advertiser when it comes to sports. We're an official partner of Major League Baseball, so we work really closely with the league, and I know they've been struggling with some of these same questions too. It's like, how do we get fans? How do we, start the season? How would we get fans back in? It doesn't look like that's probably going to be workable to get fans back in a lot of these cases. And then the downstream effect of all that is now the revenues take a huge hit. How are players being compensated? There's so many levels of complexity here. But I think that's really fascinating. I won't jump ahead to the QA, but I saw someone ask kind of around like the secondary stakeholders when it comes to things like stadiums being closed. How does a Coke, take a pretty large hit? And Julie, are you working with those types of companies? But I won't do your job for you, Perry. You're very accomplished at this.
I did want to pivot on the advertising topic. So I've been watching what's happening to marketing spend during this time. And I sort of alluded to it from the downward pressure on revenue and the pressure to deliver more content, community tools that may not directly lead to revenue, but may lead to trust and brand mindshare, and how do you balance those things? So Rob, you did sort of a brave, thank you, for Marketing Society on Brand, and counterintuitive thing, which was to continue your investment in advertising and TV advertising during this COVID downturn. I know you said earlier, your brand is very much positioned around helping people. People are at home, they're thinking about their health when they wake up in the morning. So it's not off-brand, if you will, for you to be out selling something in the way a designer dress might feel off-brand
Right.
for the moment. That said, you did continue to spend in advertising, and you did a Rory photo shoot during the pandemic. So I'd love to hear your thinking about advertising during this time. And also, how'd you pull it off without any production?
Yeah, and to clarify, so we didn't do the photo shoot during the pandemic. We did it right before, so we got lucky. We had a pool of assets, and then the team kind of had to put a lot of things together. But yeah, to your question, Perry, we've always been really opportunistic when it comes to advertising and focused purely on efficiency. So money in versus new potential patients coming out. And so, as things started unfolding in early March, we took a quick pause to take our breath. Like, things got pretty foggy. You couldn't see 10 feet in front of you. We didn't want to be overly aggressive when we didn't know what the world would look like. We didn't know what that would do to a lot of our business metrics, et cetera. But pretty quickly we saw that organic interest was continuing to grow. Telehealth is kind of having a moment in the sun. Given all the things we talked about with inability to go to the doctor physically or desire to go to the pharmacy. So we saw just organically a lot of momentum there. Google search for us was up over 30% month over month, March into April. We saw some conditions, especially on the Rory side, really start to show legs where maybe they hadn't in the past. So smoking cessation was up almost 100% month over month, and treatments like vaginal dryness and sleep were up almost 300%. And so there's kind of this natural momentum that was building. And so given we had just done the photo shoot and rates had become extremely attractive because of large advertisers pulling out, we decided it was the right time to start pushing there. And so we've been really, really excited by the results we've seen for Rory specifically on TV. And again, it's kind of this unique moment in time where we had always talked about convenience, but we're now able to really position more around safety, which is unique, and we'll see how long we're able to really tell that story. But for us, the reception has been fantastic. The ability to utilize those existing assets and have the team get really scrappy and creative has been super fun.
Great. You touched on search, and I know you're a growth guy, and I'm sure search is a significant part of your portfolio of skills. But thinking about, in this time and rapid change, how have you been able to react quickly to shifting search terms in terms of your overall marketing strategy, and particularly now? Like, has language changed? Are you able to, what's your marketing tool chest that lets you be responsive to changes in search?
Yeah, look, we have a pretty senior internal team that handles both paid and organic search. So one area we've seen pretty large growth in over the last even couple of weeks has been organic search. We have a property called Health Guide, which now covers, I believe, 25-ish different conditions and goes into extreme detail on basically frequently asked questions about those conditions. So it could be, information about smoking cessation, or we'll partner with organizations like American Diabetes Association to do a whole portal on diabetes. We've seen a massive uptick in search volume there. And on the paid side, we're always looking for areas of opportunity to push harder. There's certain terms that have just become more popular and frequent, with impression counts have popped way up. Basically anything at home has gone way up. And so the team is constantly using keyword tools and leaning on their expertise to figure out how we expand those campaigns. But again, it has been a slight tweak on our end just in terms of the messaging, and messaging that more as at home, stay safe, and using that as our wedge versus kind of the convenience elements. Great.
So the Marketing Society, as I've mentioned a couple of times, operates around this theme of bravery. We're in the business of empowering brave leaders, making tough decisions. Often marketing can be, a follow-on role or a leading role. And the group we've convened globally are really people who are leaders in the space and within their companies. Back in 2019, unwittingly, we chose the theme of Brave Together. That turns out to be pretty prescient, because little knowing how much, we would all have to be brave together if apart. Within your own organizations and the partners you work with, can you share some of the bravery you've seen during this crisis? What are some of the brave, whether they're marketing moves or a product campaign, anything you've seen that has really stood out to you? And please don't be modest if some of those brave moves have been your own.
I can talk a little bit about kind of the personal growth side of bravery. I think this is my first time leading a company. I was put in the CEO role a year ago, almost exactly a year ago now. It's been an unprecedented first year as a CEO of a small company. We raised capital, and then we entered a pandemic. When this first started, I felt like there was a big void in the way I was seeing content come out around how leaders were behaving. And there was a lot of talk about leaders in big companies and how you have your crisis committee and your PR folks and all these things. And I thought to myself, well, gee, what about me, right? And then I said, wait, I have very strong opinions about this, but who am I to talk about decisive leadership during a crisis, right? Usually we empower our employees to do what's best for them. That doesn't work during a crisis. People need to hear what the best course of action for them is sometimes, and it can't always be optional, thinking about things like working from home. Two-way trust. A lot of people are talking about how the venues or universities need to take all these steps, but what if they think that people are going to come back and be reckless? They have to have some confidence that people are going to be smart. So finding my voice to fill those voids, for me, is a little scary. That's not my natural personality. That's not where I usually play, but the response from our network, from our customers, from our partners has been really tremendous. And it's been a little bit fun too. So I admit I'm more engaged probably now in our marketing than I ever was before, and thinking about what more can we do? What more can we do? And we are, very nascent on that journey. And I'm sure there's a lot of folks on the call today who could give me tons of pointers about what more we could do. But for me, that was a personal growth change.
I think finding that authentic voice has been a theme of the last couple of years, certainly, but it's still shocking when it's missing and really appreciated when it's present. Rob, from your perspective, I mean, first of all, your whole company is brave, right? You're bringing up topics like erectile dysfunction and vaginal dryness that we haven't really talked about, right?
Yeah.
In our lifetimes, there was, the Lucy show with, married couples in twin beds, right? So we've come a long way to be able to have these conversations. Tell me about either your brave marketing approaches or the bravery of companies around you to pull out these topics and conversations.
Yeah, I think I kind of want to add on to what Julie was talking about. I think, obviously bravery comes in many forms. I have been really impressed with just some of the transparency and vulnerability we've seen from leaders across the industry, especially when it comes to really tough topics like laying people off or furloughs or cutting salaries. I think the Airbnb example a week or two ago was a really powerful one of you can be a human being and also have to deliver tough news. I thought that was very brave, and that is not out of character for Brian and the Airbnb exec team, but I thought that was a great example of how you can still show empathy while being in a position of leadership. I've also been incredibly impressed, almost like we talked about in the very beginning, but so many companies are just stepping up to the plate and doing things that aren't core to their business and probably aren't going to make them money in the short term, but will really endear people to them long term. I'm trying to think of some examples. Louis Vuitton shifting to production of hand sanitizer, right? Kind of random, doesn't make a ton of sense, but helpful because there's a massive shortage. And that's true for a lot of companies when it comes to folks who have production capabilities, shifting to masks or ventilators, just really inspiring to see people kind of, it sounds cheesy, but come together in the time of crisis. It gives me a little bit of more hope about humanity. And I think it's exciting to see. So I think there are great examples of companies and leaders stepping up to the plate and being helpful in a time where, sometimes being brave right now means doing things that don't help your business in the short term, but help society and probably will pay off long term, but needing to make those decisions now.
The funny thing, Rob, on that point is, at least I've observed, and this is not meant to be a pun, that in this environment, size doesn't matter. I was on a call a couple of days ago with a bunch of leaders of different companies in the Boston area with government officials who are trying to figure out what does the landscape look like when people return to work, are worried about public transit. How do we space out our offices? How are tiny companies getting, PPE if they're going to go back to the office? And someone said, and this is a big defense contractor worth many billions of dollars, said, what a shame we don't have that small company perspective here. And I spoke for a few minutes and we had a great back and forth, and a few more came out of the woodwork. And it was pretty phenomenal, right? Because everyone's trying to figure out the whole landscape, not just their perspective, because it's new and it's evolving. We talk about the living 3-ring binder, right? The old security and safety plans lived on a shelf gathering dust. And the way that we're talking about it today is, how do you educate people? How do you make a plan? How do you try and enforce that plan? And then how do you iterate on it, right? Because it might not be the permanent plan. It might be very dynamic. So it's just been, right? Yeah, no way. I mean, there's no way, right? The rules are changing. The understanding of the virus is changing. It's a living threat, and therefore we have to have a living response. And that hasn't been something that we've really discussed broadly before, but the openness of the big guys to talk to us, the little guys, and the government officials to try and bring in everyone, to me is phenomenally encouraging, because it says, if you have a perspective to bring to the table, we want to hear it.
Great. One last question from me, then we'll shift to some in the Q&A. What advice do you have for our Marketing Society members who are not at startups and want to infuse bravery or startup inspiration into their roles and organizations? Someone did pose a question about You've talked about malleability and agility as core competencies. What else is in your toolkit that you really wish, gosh, when I talk to Pfizer or Coca-Cola or a large stadium, I wish they had a little bit more of this in their DNA, and how might they get it?
Rob, you want to take that one first?
Sure. I'll jump right in. I think what's hard as a company gets big and, you know, in a blameless way gets more bureaucratic and specialized. I think you definitely lose the opportunity to be agile and nimble and come up with new ideas and run them down. I think the best companies, the best large companies find ways to kind of create a organizational structure that allows for some startup type of feel, where there's an opportunity to have like empower a sub team of really smart, capable folks who can tackle a specific problem. Like, hey, if we were gonna buy a startup that does this, could we take a team of 10 people and let them run loose for 6 months and build that themselves? I think it can be hard to do that within an organization that may be tens or hundreds of thousands of people globally, but I've seen really good examples of large companies create kind of this startup culture within their company and allow those ideas to flourish or fail. But in a lot of cases, good things can come out of that, and also keeps people engaged and excited and working on interesting things. So harder done than said, but I think finding a structure that allows for some of that creative thinking is really powerful.
You know, it's really interesting because I think for a lot of big companies, you know, the brand is paramount, right? We have so much invested in our brand and our messaging, and what if we say something that's insensitive, or we do something that's looked at as being the wrong move in a time of crisis? And I think the really interesting thing, and going back to Rob's example before about, you know, Louis Vuitton creating hand sanitizer, is that people want to be part of the solution, right? Even people that have never thought of being part of this type of solution before. If you told me, you know, a year ago that Fanatics was going to be making pinstripe scrubs and masks, I laughed at you and said, well, who in their right mind would ever want, you know, baseball pinstripes on their face masks? But there's a market need now, right? It's a totally different time. You know, the gin distilleries making hand sanitizer, people making, you know, hockey face shields into masks for doctors and nurses. They're really powerful stories. And even the ones for whom it's a much bigger jump, it seems like people are being a little more fearless and not being quite so concerned about how it aligns long-term to their brand, because they're saying, you know, we want to be part of that solution, and that's important to us.
Got it. Another question. Being brave with quick pivots involves taking risk, which is, you know, for your company, for yourself, and for your team. Understanding that, as you said, and startups may inherently attract more malleable people and have fewer bureaucratic sort of codified processes, change is still hard, right? Like Chesky got it right, but lots of others got it wrong. And it's hard to, you know, what have you done personally as leaders to sort of bring your team along with you, whether it's during this recent time or any time you've had to make one of these significant pivots? What are some of sort of the cultural norms you've propagated that you think make it easier to communicate and bring people along?
Yeah, I'll take that first. I think, you know, I have the benefit of working with two really great co-founders. We've all started companies before, and while we have not been through obviously something like this, we've learned a lot about how to treat people. And I think the most important thing you can do to bring people along when there are these inevitable shifts is be transparent. Be transparent and explain your reasoning. I think we have found in the past where we tried to kind of have more of a top-down, like, hey, we're going to do this, but now we're doing this. Approach people, there's just too much whiplash, and people don't understand why and what the reasoning is. If you're bringing in smart, capable people, you need to treat them like smart, capable people. And so we try to be incredibly transparent with as much as we can about if there's a change to the roadmap or there's a change to a business metric that we're focused on, why that is and why it's important for the long-term success of the business. And always try and frame it in a way where if you explain it rationally to someone, they say, oh yeah, I understand. That makes total sense. Like, let's go work on this other thing now.
Like an internal elevator pitch.
Yeah, and just trusting people with information where sometimes, again, easier in a slightly smaller organization with only like a few hundred people, but trusting people with some of the data that you might generally hold closer to the vest to say like, hey, we were gonna do this, and then we saw this happen, and now this project we've been working on for 2 months actually isn't gonna make sense anymore. We're gonna go in this other direction. Bringing people along and treating them, with respect through transparency has been really, really helpful.
Anything to add, Julie?
No, I mean, I think that balance of communication is probably the hardest thing, right? You want to share enough to equip people to make great decisions. You don't want to share too much and potentially add stress to how people are making decisions every day, but empowering them to work within your org is really important. On that, whiplash type point, I think if you acknowledge the fact that it's changing and that you're responding to it, even just acknowledging that goes a long way, right? You don't have to say this is the permanent solution, but acknowledging that we are reacting to a change in the market environment, and therefore this might change again. It helps people stay intellectually malleable, if you will, right? So that I don't get glued to this, density solution being the end all be all for Armored Things. Next week, it could be, helping with contact tracing, whatever it is, right? So helping people stay emotionally flexible.
Do you think someone on your team was listening and they heard that and now they're freaking out?
I hope so. It wouldn't be the first time in the last 2 months, probably.
A question from the audience. You could both be described as being lucky in this pandemic. I'm sure you don't wake up in the morning and think that, but you both do things that people have needed more in their own way, either in the pandemic or to plan for after it. Have you ever been doing something where a change of circumstances has killed your business stone dead? And what did you do?
So I will say that, around March 13th or 15th, when in 6 days it felt like things went from a booming economy to everyone hitting the brakes, it didn't feel like we were in the position to accelerate coming out of this. It felt like we might never see the crowds at campuses or even at employers that we had been seeing in the past. And that was a stark realization, right? But it took those tests. It took A/B testing our communications and communicating with customers and realizing we couldn't talk about our product the way we had been, that we really had to shift the narrative before we found any sort of traction. And that wasn't a fast process, because for the first 3 weeks of people working at home, no one wanted to talk about anything, even if you could help them. So it probably took between 3 to 5 weeks before we really said, okay, wait, people are starting to read those teasers. They are starting to think about reopening, and another 4 weeks before anyone really wanted to talk about it. So with all that being said, that's still pretty recent. And I'm sure there are others who now look like they're in a pretty strong position, but no company that I talked to, no founder that I talked to was without fear during this crisis. And so, I think the grass is always greener. I'm quite jealous of the Zoom CEO, but I think he's sitting there saying, everyone thinks my product has security issues, and, hey, wait, I'm helping everyone talk to grandma. The grass is always greener. And I think we're all just doing the best we can to be a part of the solution right now.
Yeah, I'll echo that. I think as soon as all this really unfolded, I don't think anyone felt like they were in a position of strength. I think things were so cloudy and honestly still are in some cases, but you need a little bit of time to see how the data unfolds. And take someone like us where it was unclear. Some of our conditions are more as needed. Some are on a more daily basis. Are all of a sudden people who are taking hair loss medication just not going to buy it anymore because unemployment is going way up and that's not an expense they can afford? Someone who's on suppressive therapy for cold sores, how does that play into is it putting food on the table or getting medication? So there's a lot of unknowns, and I think we're still working to see what the equilibrium is. But we are well positioned to take advantage of current state when it comes to everyone being stuck at home and still wanting to take care of their health.
Got it. Speaking of health, we have a question about mental health. In a crisis like this one, it's hard to think that the number of people suffering from mental health challenges is not going to increase. So how does Rob and the team at Rowe think about treating mental health? Is that an area you'll try to approach one day?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really, we have a lot of people that are really passionate about mental health on the team specifically, and particularly in an environment like this where they're a byproduct of everyone kind of sheltering in place is absolutely challenges with mental health and a whole different set of challenges. We've taken a look at a bunch of different areas there, if it's acquiring companies, if it's building our own solutions. I think part of what we've always had to do is make sure that while we're pushing and innovating, we're not doing something that is completely non-tangential to what we've already built. We've built a national physician network. We've built a national pharmacy network. Making sure that we're staying still relatively close to those core areas that we've built that are differentiators and moats for us, and not branching out too far just yet into areas where we don't already have a competitive advantage. So it's something we've looked at and we'll continue to look at. It's critically important. We've talked to partners about how we do screening when people are coming in for conditions around mental health. We've talked about off-ramps for partners to hand folks off if there is a need there, and something we'll continue to research and look to invest in the future.
Excellent. Here's a tough question. In business, which leader did you once admire, but since then has disappointed you?
Oh boy.
Oh boy.
Or, is there a leader you admire and why? If you can't come up with the first one. If you're brave, take the first one.
I mean, I guess I'm less brave, so I'll take the second one. And kind of a cop out, but I think we talk a lot about Amazon internally as an organization, as a structure. I think, one thing that we've tried to implement, if you look at Bezos and the way that they lay out both their shareholder letters and the way they structure meetings, is this concept of a pre-read and a 2-pizza rule. So the 2-pizza rule, you should never have a meeting that has too many people where you couldn't feed the whole group with 2 pizzas, because that's probably just a waste of a lot of people's time. And then the concept of a pre-read. If you're going to have a meeting where you need to set context, the person who's running the meeting needs to write, a several page, whatever sufficient strategy doc ahead of time. Let people read and digest, and then not spend the time when you actually have people together in a room relitigating what the problem is. Everyone should come in with full context. I think there's a lot of examples from Bezos and Amazon where they have just streamlined productivity and gotten a lot out of their team by doing that.
Great. And one final question for Julie. What personal qualities have you found that you've had that proven most useful in recent weeks? So I know you've discovered this new authenticity and leadership, but anything else that you sort of dug deep on and found as a leadership moment?
100% empathy. 100% empathy. There are a lot of hard communications right now. Even if you're not, laying off 1,000 people, right? There's a ton of hard communications because there's so much uncertainty. And when you're communicating in a difficult time, people hear that message very differently, even if you're saying the same words. So learning to put it in writing, I think to the point that Rob just made, right? Send a memo, then communicate it verbally, then make sure people don't have follow-up questions. It has all worked tremendously. But this week, I've actually taken the time, I'm still in the process of calling every single one of our team members. And I will tell you that is, it's a lot of time in a time where we're really busy and there's a lot of other things to do. But it's probably been one of the most valuable things I've done this year. And it's not just because of the uncertainty, but it's because people are feeling more detached than ever. And I think for some folks, getting a call from your CEO can feel really unnerving. And so, I did preview to them, hey, I'm just calling to check in. Nothing bad is coming out of it. But by the end of the conversations, you tend to be on a different plane with your employees than you were before. And it all comes back to trust and respect and acknowledging that everyone's situation is hard, whether they're living alone, living with kids, missing their family, tired of their work from home setup. So everyone is going through something.
Great. Well, we're up on the hour. I want to thank you both so much, ending on that note of trust, empathy, and of course, bravery. Many thanks to Julie Johnson, co-founder and CEO of Armored Things, to Rob, head of growth and marketing at Row, and thanks to everyone in our audience for joining us today with the Marketing Society. I wish you all the best and be well. Bye-bye.